last night, that talk on telling our egos to take a proverbial hike that I planned, it went right off the rails. And I know that you're all familiar by now with my saying that the talk took a detour, but this wasn't a detour, okay? It veered right off the road altogether. And because I wasn't doing anything in particular to lead it there, I had to concede that whatever I planned isn't what was needed for today. In fact, someone else entirely built the platform to support our lesson. How many of you know of the late, brilliant Alan Watts? If you haven't heard of him, look him up. You will be very glad you did. He possessed a wonderful way of making sense of a great many deep thoughts, which many of us have struggled to fully grasp, and he did so with a wit and humor that is absolutely enchanting. It is he who brought us here off the road and into the wilderness, and it is largely through his words that we will arrive at some semblance of a point. And I say that because I wrote this intro last night, after Alan sweetly hijacked the talk, but before I entirely knew what we, Alan and I, were going to do with it. So the last night me was really kind of flummoxed and hopeful at best. But see, these things always seem to end up exactly where they belong. So as always, I just got out of the way and I let someone else take the lead. And today me says, oh, I'm so glad I did. Remember, we're talking all about freeing ourselves from ego right now. This is talk 3 of 5 on the subject. And we will start by asking ourselves an extremely important and absolutely trivial question. Who am I? Alan said, the seer, the knower, the one who you are is the most inaccessible of all experiences, completely mysterious and hidden. And yet we talk about our egos. We use the word I. And I've always been tremendously interested in what people mean by the word I, because it comes out in curious lapses of speech. Like we don't say I am a body, we say I have a body. And somehow we don't seem to identify ourselves with ourselves. We say my feet, my hands, my teeth, as if they were something outside of us. When people, including myself, talk about their respective me, it seems like we all believe that the we, that the real us exists somewhere up here in the head, right? Right about where the eyes and ears intersect, right? When you say me, you always end up pointing here. And it seems like we think we reside here, and all of the rest of the stuff here is just kind of dangling from the me. It's the hardware that we were issued when we came into being as a person, and it's all just kind of hanging there from the I up here. And that me inside, that me in here, is what the smartest minds in the world have decided to call the ego. And it is what we speak about when we say me. Alan said, I can't get rid of the idea that that's a hallucination. That's not what you are at all, and it's a very dangerous hallucination because it gives you the idea that you are a center of consciousness, of energy, of responsibility that stands over, against, and in opposition to everything else. You're a chauffeur inside your own body as if your body were an automobile, but you feel caught in a trap because your body's kind of a mess. It gets sick, tired, it hurts, and eventually wears out and dies. And you feel caught in the thing because you feel different from it. And you feel the world outside your body, furthermore, is an awful trap. It's full of stupid people. These are his words, not mine. Back this up. He says, it's full of stupid people people who are sometimes nice to you, but mostly aren't, because they're all out for themselves like you are. And therefore, there's one heck of a conflict going on. And I did paraphrase because he used words that I don't generally use up here. They weren't horrible, but they're not up here words. They're down there words. So we come to think of ourselves as these vulnerable little centers of tender consciousness that exist in a world that couldn't care less about us. And we dig in our heels to pick a fight with this world, to beat it into submission to our wills. We conquer. Everything in our life, every achievement is a victory, a win. We're at war with everything around us because we seem to believe that we are these lonely, individual, divided little ego selves, which are thrust into navigating a world that doesn't go our way, unless we can somehow manage to force it to. How do we get to this false belief of being a little individual ego, or, in layman's terms, a person? For when we speak of him, her, or them, we are speaking of people, right? And since we're going along on this journey with the mind of Alan Watts, we'll acknowledge that ego and person are interchangeable words. Okay? Person implies a solitary being or a single human consciousness, right? So every time you hear the word ego as we move forward today, it helps you think person, specifically a person who is individual, only one of many, many people on the planet. So the ego, what we feel as I, consists of two elements, Alan says. Number one is our image or our idea of ourselves. This is mostly made up of things that other people have told us about ourselves, or by looking at ourselves in a mirror or listening to ourselves played back in audio or video. It's the image that we hold of ourselves. And Alan tells this wonderful story which illustrates this perfectly. And since I couldn't think of one of my own to top it, I'm sticking with his. He says, when I was a little boy, I remember I had a friend up the street called Peter, and I admired Peter very much. Sometimes I came home and I imitated Peter's behavior, and my mother said to me, Alan, that's not you, that's Peter, because you see, she was giving me an image of myself. And when I did anything terrible, she said, Alan, it's just not like you to do that. See, she was busy building in me an image, an idea of the kind of act I was supposed to put on, the kind of person I was supposed to be. Now, you know that I'm a logopod, right? I love me some words. I like to know where they came from, how they got there, and if the meaning helped, usually it does not. And it kind of blew my mind when I found out how the word person came to be. It's not even close to what you would imagine. So it comes from the Latin persona. Per means that or it, and sonum is sound. Persona is that through which the sound goes. It originally referred to a mask worn by an actor in the early days because the mouths of the mask were made like little megaphones so that the actor could be heard in the theater. So the persona, in modern terms, the person, is a mask. The role we're playing. And all through our lives, our friends and family and parents and teachers and partners are busy telling us who we are, what we're supposed to do in all areas of our lives. And Alan says, and you know there are a certain number of acceptable roles you can play. So first of all then, your sense of I is your sense of who you are, whether you're the tinker, tailor, soldier, rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief, whether you're a clown type, a strong silent type, a clinging vine type, etc., etc. We can name dozens of them, but you identify yourself with a certain way of acting. It's quite complicated, but nevertheless, there's a certain way of acting with which you identify yourself and which constitutes your image. And here is where Alan's Englishness and brilliance pair beautifully. He goes on to say, and please understand, I am not parodying the English. He just speaks with this cadence that is so delicious that if I sound like I'm mimicking him, I'm not. I'm enjoying these words very, very much. They're chewy. He goes on to say, now, that image of yourself you have is a social institution in the same way. For example, as it is a social institution to divide the day into 24 hours, or to draw lines of latitude and longitude, which are purely imaginary over the surface of the earth. It is very useful to do that, because by means of that we navigate. But there are no lines of latitude and longitude over the earth. They are imaginary. You cannot, for example, use the equator to tie up a package because it's an abstract, imaginary line. And so in just the same way, your image of yourself as an ego is an imaginary concept that is not this organism and is therefore not this organism in its separate relationship to its whole physical and natural environment. And so he says, the image we each have of ourselves is a caricature of ourselves, because it does not include all the important things about ourselves. It doesn't include what's happening inside the physical organism. And if you really stop and think about it, that's a lot to chew on. While we all become aware of our individual organisms, our bodies, when we move, especially when the movement is strenuous, when we're wearing shoes that are cute but not made for comfort, case in point, or when our tummies are rumbling, or when we're otherwise uncomfortable, the reality is that the vast majority of the time, we are completely unaware of this organism that the eye up here is driving. We know when something is not right, or when something new is happening. But for the most part, we're totally unconscious of everything going on inside of us. Don't believe me? After the service, go grab some food and bring it over to me, because invariably I will be in here putting stuff away or in there putting stuff away. Come and grab me, bring the food over to me, and then demonstrate to me exactly what is happening as you eat it. Show me how you control the whole thing, starting with the process of mastication, then to digestion and the assimilation of nutrients and the movement of waste, and explain to me how exactly you determine which bits will be assimilated and which will become waste. Right? We are largely unaware of what is happening here. We are unconscious of our brains, which are what is actually directing the digestion, assimilation, waste, and everything else happening to keep our incredible bodies alive. We are unconscious of our relationships to the external world. We don't think about air pressure. We don't think about the chemical constitution of the air that we breathe. We don't think about the cosmic rays and the gamma rays or the output of the sun. In fact, many of our relationships to other people are completely unconscious. I mean, we depend on people who keep our phones and other devices working, people who make sure we have electricity. There are all kinds of people providing services that we all depend on. And have any of us ever sat down and diligently mapped out who's doing what to keep our lives running smoothly in modern day human experience? I haven't. But it is something to think about. All of these things and people are essential to life as we know it, but they are not included in the ego image. And Alan Watts says the ego image is an illusion. But we say, now look, it can't be that way because I feel I mean, it's not just an image I have a solid feeling behind the word I. When I think I feel there's something here. So I feel, don't I, that behind this image, this symbol of myself, there is what we would call a concrete referent. There is a feeling, a solid sensation to which it refers. Now, what is that? And that's an interesting question. If your brain is your ego and you say you have this solid sensation in your brain, how exactly does that work? Because the way this body that we're driving is made, we have almost no direct sensation in the brain. In fact, operations can be performed on the brain with only surface anesthesia because there's no feeling in the brain itself. Try that one on for size. You don't feel all of these interior operations. They, therefore, can't be the seemingly very real feeling or sensation of ego. When your eyes are functioning well, you don't feel your eyes. If your eyes are imperfect, you see spots in front of them, and that means that there's some lesions in the retina or wherever, whatever's going wrong. And because your eyes aren't working properly, you feel them. And you don't feel your ears most of the time. But if you have a ringing in your ears, it means there's something wrong, right? And that's when you pay attention. So therefore, when you think I, you do feel yourself, you do have a real sort of feeling, there must be something wrong with I. Which more specifically means there's something wrong with you. The you you're feeling when you think I am. And whenever you have the sensation of I, it's like having spots in front of the eyes. It means there's something wrong. That's why you feel you as being different from and somehow cut off from that which you really are, which is everything that you're experiencing. All those moments where you feel embarrassed, ashamed, self-conscious, disrespected, insulted in any way, that means something isn't right. The truth is, the real you is the totality of everything you're aware of, and so much more than you could ever hope to become aware of. But what is this thing we feel in ourselves when we say, I am? I'm going to borrow from Dear Allen again here. There is something about his British delivery that is just yummy. And it's so much better than I could hope to convey with my Los Angeles tongue. When you were a little child in school, you remember, you were picking your nose and looking out the window, flicking spitballs at something. Suddenly the teacher rapped on the desk and said, hey, pay attention. Now, how did you do that? Well, you stared at the teacher. You put a frown on your face because that's how it looks like to pay attention. And when the teacher sees all the pupils in the class staring at her or him and frowning, then the teacher is consoled and feels that the class is paying attention. The class is doing nothing of the kind. They're pretending to pay attention. We all do all sorts of physical things as a sort of imagined control of our nervous system. Have you ever done that thing where you're reading a book and suddenly you realize that you've turned a few pages and had no idea what was happening on any of them because you've been thinking? Right. We've all done that, right? And maybe it's a book that you have to read, like for school or for work. And so you flip the pages back and you sort of glare at the words sternly, right? Willing them to make sense. And maybe you have to do this flip back thing and read and focus that thing several times, trying to make sense of the words, but they still don't make sense because what you're really paying attention to is reading the words, not allowing yourself to understand them. And what about when somebody tells you you've got to use your willpower, get that willpower together, and make it happen. What does it look like to use your willpower? They say grit your teeth, put your back into it, make it happen, so you clench your jaw and ball up your hands into fists and you lean into it. Or if you're fighting to not show emotions, you go upright and uptight. You hold your breath and you contract your muscles to exert some kind of control. But none of those things have anything to do with the functioning of your nervous system. And I love what he said here. It illustrates the point perfectly. It's like taking off in a jet plane. You've gone zooming down the runway and you think this plane has gone too far down the runway and isn't up in the air yet. So you start pulling at your seatbelts to help lift the thing up. It doesn't have any effect. It is the same way with all of the many ways we do things every day. So we look like we're paying attention. So we look like we're trying. So we outwardly look like whatever we're doing, whatever we think we should be doing, that we're doing it when others look at us. And Alan says that it's that sensation of straining to look like we're referring to when we say we feel and I. He says the ego is the image of ourselves which is incorrect, is false, is only a caricature combined with a physical, muscular effort to will things to happen, to be effective. So what now? Right? It's kind of easy to get nihilistic when we only get this far into things, right? Because here Alan Watts and I have led you down this road and told you that everything is make-believe. Right? Literally, we've told you it is all a mask, that you're doing all of these things to make yourself and others believe that what you're doing is happening, and none of it is real. But that's not the whole story. So if you get sad and you pack up your toys and you go home now, you're going to miss the best parts. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could feel the sensation of ourselves in a way that was real and factual? The facts of the reality of our existence is that we are both the natural environment, which, spoiler alert, is the whole universe. We are both the natural environment and the organism of our body playing together. And if you want the whole breakdown of how that works, I'll type it up and I'll have it ready for you to pick up at Wednesday night service. But I'm not going there today because it's a lot. Why doesn't it feel that way? Why doesn't it feel like we and all around us are the same stuff playing together? Why doesn't it feel like this body we're in is part of the larger everything that's also part of us? It's because all of those other feelings get in the way. The socially induced way of feeling that comes upon us throughout the whole educational process of our lives up until this point give us an intangible, unreal, almost hallucinatory feeling of who we are, and so we act from that place. And by real versus unreal, we mean factual. Not it feels real, so it must be real. We've already established that those are not the actual rules to this game called life, right? The feel isn't the thing, the thought is the thing. But that's a talk for a different day. And you might join us in the bookstore after the service because we have talks about that all the time. But back to the course. We have to move past that I, me feeling. How do we get rid of it? We don't. In this Alan Watts-driven example, that's the wrong question. It can't be done. You can't lift yourself out of this illusion by pulling yourself up while standing in the illusion. You can't put out fire with fire, so you can't get rid of the ego with your ego. You'll be the personification of anxiety. You know, the one from the new movie Inside Out 2. She's the new character. You'll worry because you're worried, and then worry because you're worried about being worried. And that definitely won't get you there. He says, the first thing to understand when you say, what can I do about getting rid of this false ego is, the first answer is nothing, because you're asking the wrong question. You are asking, how can I, thinking of myself as an ego, get rid of thinking of myself as an ego? Well, obviously you can't. No, you'll say, then it's hopeless. Now, wait a minute. Don't go so fast, he says. It isn't hopeless. You haven't gotten the message, that's all. If you find out that your ego feeling, your will and all that jazz cannot get rid of that hallucination, you found out something very important. In finding out that you can't do anything about it, what you have found out is that you don't exist. Wait for it. It took me a beat to get to where he was going, but it's big, so hang in here with me. And I think you'll agree that after all of the work that we've already done in the Now and Judgment series, and if you haven't, you've got to go back or you'll be just as lost as I was at first. Go back and do both. But we've done the work, right? We've done Now, we've done Judgment. So we're already almost all the way here. So hang in here. He goes on to say, that is to say, you, as ego, you don't exist, so obviously you can't do anything about it. So you find you can't control, not really, your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, all the processes going on inside and outside you that are happening. There's nothing you can do about it. So then what follows? Well, there's only one thing that follows. You watch what's going on. You see, feel this whole thing happening, and then suddenly you find, to your amazement, you can still act. You can still move. You can still go on in a rational way, but you suddenly discovered that you're not what you thought you were. You're not this ego pushing and shoving things inside a bag of skin. You're being now, not merely feeling. Not in the old illusory way. You feel yourself now in a new way as the whole world, which includes your body, everything you experience is going on. It's intelligent. Trust it. And with that statement, I'm going to leave you with our second inspirational reading from this morning. I chose that reading long before I knew Alan Watts had ever spoken about ego at all. And I will tell you, I wasn't even looking for somebody saying something about ego when he landed. He popped up as an image in the Google search. And I went, huh, and I clicked on it. And there it was. So I chose this reading well in advance of that. I threw all my plans out the window and I went with what he said, and here is the reading. It only reconfirms for me that even when the talks I'd planned in my ego mind to veer off the road into wilderness unknown, there is a larger plan behind it all. And as ever, I trust it. And this is from The Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes on pages 33 and 34. There is a power in the universe that honors our faith in it. There is a law in the universe which exacts the uttermost farthing. We all wish to feel that the power behind everything is good as well as creative, an eternal and changeless intelligence in which humanity lives and moves and has its being. Intuitively, we sense that every man and woman in their native state is some part or manifestation of the eternal principle, and that the entire problem of limitation, evil, suffering, and uncertainty is not God-ordained, but is a result of ignorance. We find ourselves torn by confusion, by conflict, by affirmation and denial, by emotion congested with fear, congealed by pride. We are afraid of the universe in which we live, suspicious of people around us, uncertain of the salvation of our own souls. Nature seems to await our comprehension of her. And since she is governed by immutable laws, the ignorance of which excuses no one from their effects, the bondage of humanity must be a result of our ignorance of the true nature of reality. The storehouse of nature may be filled with good, but this good is locked to the ignorant. Think about that. Thank you.